Welcome back to this week's episode of The Big Sky Now. On this week's episode, back at it again is the one and only Fritz Neighbor of the Daily Interleague. Talk a little Grizzlies football, Big Sky football through week 2, and we're going to talk a little bit about Montana State. Last second nail-biting loss versus South Dakota State, the number 1 team in the nation. It was a thriller, no doubt about it. On next week's show, we're hoping to put a little panel together of Northwest-based sports reporters, talk a little Big Sky action, have some reporters from Idaho, Washington, Montana, talk a little bit of Big Sky football in general, Idaho, Eastern Washington, definitely going to be mixing them in, and don't think we're not going to be talking a lot of Montana State and Grizzlies as well. So looking forward to that panel next week. Hopefully we'll have that together for all you Big Sky football fans, get some knowledge from around the region, dive in all the teams. It's going to be a lot of fun. A lot of great Big Sky football to talk on this week's show, though, so let's get into it with the one and only Fritz Neighbor. All right, thanks as always for taking the time, Fritz. We're going to talk a little Griz football, some Big Sky football, back again with the one and only Fritz Neighbor. Anything you want to start out with, Fritz? If not, I did want to talk a little about the Griz running back room, but anything you ready to dive into? Or
No, we can start there.
Okay, yeah, I was going to say, this year's running back room, they look loaded with talent. Nick Osmo was the go-to guy last year. His debut this year came against Utah Tech. Looked like a machine, 118 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns. Eli Gilman looks to be emerging as a big-time contributor. And then they have Xavier Harris, and Isaiah Childs. Just wanted to get your thoughts on the Grizzlies' running back room. Are they one of the best in the conference? And then go into more depth. I know you're familiar with offensive coordinator Brent Pease. Do you think they'll continue to lean on the run game like they have early? Because that running back room looks loaded to me. And then Clifton McDowell's a good runner as well, just to dive into it.
Yeah, no, I think what you saw last week is the way Bobby Hawk would like to do it. Mm-hmm. It's, having a power running game, being able to dictate the action, keep the ball out of the other team's hands, score. Mm-hmm. I think he would love to be able to run it, 45 times a game and get first downs with every 2 runs. Osmo, welcome back to him. He's a very explosive back. You saw it on that 47-yard run where he just flat out ran everybody. Mm-hmm. But he's also he gets banged up. He was banged up off and on last year.
Yeah.
Missed the first game this year. Gilman is a redshirt freshman who's very talented. Then we mentioned Harris and the like. And it's a good running back room. I think the offensive line's gotten better and better slowly in this second tenure of Bobby's. Run as coach. So, but I was a little surprised that not only did they go with McDowell as a starter, but he played most of the game. Mm-hmm. If they really were getting if they were behind the sticks a lot, then I imagine we would have seen the throwing side of the quarterback to him a little bit more. But it wasn't needed at Utah Tech. Utah Tech's not very good, at least compared to the Big Sky schools they've played so far. They get NEU this weekend. We'll see how that goes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I asked that because it seemed like one takeaway I had, I watched the Bobcats, and they have so much talent running the football at their quarterbacks, but none of their running backs have, stood out. Humphrey had a big week 1, but again, versus Utah Tech, some of that came in garbage time. Point I'm getting at is you could almost say the Griz could more complete rushing attack, and not more better than the Bobcats, but you look at their running back core, and I'm like, you can rely on that, whereas the running quarterbacks, I worry down the stretch with injuries. I was going to ask you any other takeaways from that Utah Tech game. One thing that stood out to me, I heard the Utah Tech announcer say the Griz O-line and D-line has been equally impressive as the Bobcats in week 1. The Bobcats last year won the conference. They're nationally ranked number 3. But that's a good sign for the Griz because football games a lot of time won up front. So that's my main takeaway from that. They're loaded up front. Just any other takeaways from the Utah Tech game?
Well, I think it's interesting that they do that comparison. I think it's worth noting, moving away from Utah Tech and to last week's showdown at South Dakota State with the Cats. I think last year in the semis, they ran for 58 yards. It was all on a terrible field, terrible conditions. But, this time they ran for 221, and it looked like they had that game won with that last second pass. Zeros on the board, and the back judge doing this. So, tough call, tough review.
Yeah.
I think it was the Missouri Valley.
Sounds about right.
I've seen that a lot. Play reviews are great until until you go to James Madison and you see two of them get overturned.
You're like, something fishy
in favor of James Madison in 2008. Anyway, I guess I'm over that by now. But,
just barely.
But yeah, I think the Cats are every bit as good as advertised too. It'll be a great game. Looking ahead to November when they come over to Washington Grizzly Stadium.
Yeah, no, and I guess I don't want to jump ahead too far, but you bring up the Cats and their outlook for the season. I think I'm very high on that team, obviously. It's easy to say that. But the one concern I have the more I watch is their quarterbacks get banged up. They run the football a ton. That comes with the territory.
Right.
Do they need to maybe change up their offensive game plan just a little bit, take a little of the load off Malott and Chambers, keep them fresh for the postseason run? Because last season versus South Dakota State, Malott in that game on the ice, all that, he was getting banged up as well. So, and Chambers dealt with injuries. So that'd be my only question about the Bobcats is, do they need to put some wrinkles in the passing game, put the ball in the running back's hands more? Because got to keep those guys fresh for the postseason, or it's it just changes the game completely. So.
Yeah, I don't think either one of those quarterbacks is a quote unquote throwing quarterback.
Yeah,
I mean,
definitely.
Tommy's a great player and kind of a miracle worker, but he's also been baked up more than once. So when it happens again, it happened in the championship game 2 years ago at North Dakota State versus North Dakota State, I should say, in Texas. Then it happened again Saturday, and I don't know what his status is this weekend. They won't need him, I don't think, against the Stetson Headers.
Yeah.
But, yeah, they're putting a lot on those running quarterbacks. It's a great offense. It's a great way to give defenses a problems when you do the +1 running game. And they're both really good runners. But they also have good running backs. We just didn't really see it because South Dakota State's so good.
Yeah, and they were going all in. I know we had talked last week, Coach Vegan was saying that was like the bulletin board game. They were looking forward to getting that one back. So they went all in. They were looking to win. That was my only takeaway, though. I'm like, throughout the whole season, you cannot let Tommy Malott and Sean Chambers get banged up because then come FCS playoffs, it's like you're rewriting the script. So that was my only concern. Back to the Griz, I did want to ask you, they're set to take on the number 1 D2 school in the nation, kind of an interesting matchup. I was shocked to see the Griz are only 14.5-point favorites. So Ferris State's getting some respect in this game. Just anything you know about Ferris State and the program, and just kind of what do you expect to see from the Griz?
Yeah, it's a D2 power. They've won 28 straight on the road, so they must travel well.
Yeah.
You wonder how they'll deal with the crowd at Washington Grizzlies. They have a 13,000-seat stadium.
That's solid.
In Big Rapids, Michigan. They play 2 quarterbacks, and they both seem to be a handful. The left-handed starter, Malik Mitchell, he's pretty good, completes a high percentage. And then as a freshman last year, the backup, Carson Gulker, what a good name. He rushed for 31 touchdowns for him last year.
Oh, jeez.
I was pretty excited about watching last year's D2 championship because it was Colorado School of Mines, and they just thumped them, 41-14. So they're good. They just graduated a defensive end to the NFL. They got some players. I think there's going to be enough of a talent deficit, 36 scholarships versus 63 scholarships, that they'll wear down. But I've seen Central Washington come in with Mike Riley from Kalispell, from Flathead High, and play the Griz tough and lose by a touchdown. I've seen D2 schools going with Danny Woodward going to Bobcat Stadium and win. So, yeah, it'll be a tough game. I think it'll be Griz by 10. And I would take the points.
Yeah, and that's a lot closer than initially. I saw that on the line there. I was like, oh, my gosh, so this is going to be a good one. At first, you write off a D2 school, and then I guess that leads me into one to ask you, just someone who's followed the Big Sky, fan of the Griz, fan of the Big Sky, just your thoughts on teams taking that route where they schedule maybe, I wouldn't call Ferris State lower competition because they're the real deal, it sounds like. They're probably more talented than some of the lower FCS schools, it sounds like. But they're taking the lower conference games versus you got Idaho playing Pac-12 school in Cal this week. Do you have any preference on it all? And there's really no right or wrong answer, just kind of your thoughts on covering it over the years, if you see any difference in teams preparing, anything like that.
Well, I think if I was Bobby, I'd rather play Western Oregon than Ferris State as far as D2 schools go. I don't know, a few years ago when I was a much younger man, University of Montana misplaced $1 million in their athletic budget. They were in a deficit.
Oh, geez.
So they started scheduling big games, big paydays.
Got to do what you got to do.
And every time they did, they got beat and they got beat up. And I think it affected them later in the season. I mean, there's attrition every season. You get guys banged up, but Josh Schwager breaking a finger at Iowa. It wears on a team to go up a level and play a Pac-12 or a Big Ten school. It's fun. I mean, Iowa City was amazing. But, it's just it's a tough road to hoe. And once they made up that deficit, they didn't schedule those games anymore. I don't blame them.
Yeah, and I'm kind of in the same boat as you. We're on paper at first. You go, scheduling the D2 matchup, and like I said, Ferris State's the real deal. But is it the cakewalk approach, this and that? And then I always think of Nick Saban in the SEC, people giving him crap for 15 years because he always schedules. This year they lost to Texas. That being said, they usually have a couple cakewalks on the schedule, but it seems like it works. And that's my bigger point is the war of attrition. It's like keep guys healthy. Rather go in and play a Cal this week, risk getting a guy hurt for conference play, or let's try to go and get I don't want to say cruise to a victory, but have that chance to maybe rest your starters, whatever it may be. Again, this is a step up in your typical lower conference game, but I agree completely. I just thought it was interesting because it's a fine line between playing a Cal, and then I know Idaho did beat Nevada last week and they got paid to do that. That's interesting, but the risk is there for injury, and yes, exactly. It's like, plus your team could get demoralized. You lose 70-3, all of a sudden it turns some heads. So, no, that was my big one there. As far as other Big Sky stuff, I did want to ask you a little bit about Nevada. Idaho's win over Nevada. Your thoughts on that and just getting a win over FBS school, just solidifying them as being back, kind of. Your thoughts on Idaho right now? We talked about them last week, but they're the real deal.
Yeah. Well, I was trying to remember if Idaho and Nevada, once they left the Big Sky, Idaho left in '96. Nevada left before that, back when we called them Nevada Reno. And, Nevada's down, but they still had to pay Idaho $400,000 to come down and beat them. And did you see the Kibby Dome tweet? Kibby Dome has its own tweet. And they said, what should we buy?
Oh, yeah, time to treat ourselves, right?
Yeah. No, I suggested an above-ground pool, but I didn't get a response.
Hey, that's not a bad idea right there.
But I think Idaho is the real deal. I think we talked about that last week. Like Johnny McCoy and Hayden Hatton. Hayden Hatton's the second coming of Cooper Kupp. He's really good.
Yeah, I've thought that too as well. No, I had to bring it up because that's an impressive one. We were kind of just talking about the level of competition. So every once in a while you go beat a FBS school, but yeah, for the most part, you're putting your team at risk to get blown out, have injuries, all of those things. So I agree. I'm not the biggest fan of going and playing a game that you're going to get crushed in. Rather play a most close to competition you can or go in and do the crushing. Anyway, so back to the Big Sky as a whole, I did want to ask, right now there's 6 teams in the top 25 according to the Stats FCS poll and I believe the coaches poll. In the coaches poll, 6 teams. You got UC Davis 16th, Montana's 11th, Idaho 10th, Weber State 7th, Sac State 6th, and Montana State leads the pack as the number 3 team in the nation. I just want to get your thoughts on, has there ever been a time the modern Big Sky's been this deep, and has there ever been 6 nationally ranked teams that you can remember?
Well, I think it happened last year.
Okay.
And toward the end, it seemed like me that Davis could have easily gone into the FCA playoffs ahead of Montana, and then Montana got in because I think a little bit of that is they write nice checks to the NCAA, guaranteeing how much money they'll make off ticket sales. So, yeah, could have been 5 teams got in last year. Could have been 6. I think 6 that's a big ask. But I think 5 will get in this year, just depending on how it all shakes out down the stretch. Montana's schedule is much more favorable this year than last year. Last year's was brutal.
Yeah. Having
Weber and Montana State and somebody else on the road.
Sac State, yeah.
And had Sac State beat, it seemed like. So, I think Montana's looking good. Montana State's looking good. Idaho looks great. We didn't mention Weber State last time, and we got to mention them. I don't think they're quite as good as last year, but they're still good. And I think Davis is going to march into the playoffs. So.
Continue to emerge. Yeah, it's funny you bring up Weber State. That was one of the last things I did want to ask you because we didn't talk about them last week. Do you know anything about this year's Weber State squad or any kind of thing on the radar for them? Because they're kind of, I don't want to say the team left out, but I hear a lot of Montana State, Idaho. You hear the Griz a lot, Sac State. Weber State's kind of floating in there as like the number 7 school in the whole nation. So just your thoughts on them this year. I know you said probably not as good as years past, but just maybe expectations.
Yeah,
there.
Kind of laying in the weeds.
Yeah.
Same with Sac State. They both have new coaches and are coming off great seasons. And I'm just kind of taking a wait and see. I haven't delved them too deeply. I don't believe the Griz play them this year.
Yeah, I'll check the schedule real quick.
No, I'm sure they don't, because they would have played them at home if they played them, and they don't play them at home. So
okay.
I think they're good. I just think that there might be 2 or 3 teams in the Big Sky that are the better.
Yeah, and that's just like I wrote it down in my notes. I'm like, the number 10 team in the country might finish 4th in the Big Sky, so it's pretty crazy right now. I mean, I haven't followed FCS football for all that long, but right now they seem like the best conference as far as depth goes in the nation. That Missouri Valley, you have so much top heavy there. But I mean, as far as depth goes, they have the most teams in the top 25. The Big Sky's loaded right now. So like you said, kind of just wait and see how some of these teams do. New head coach, Weber State, Sac State, I think that's the biggest thing. Just once conference play begins, does the new coaches adapt, or is it step up in competition? So we'll wait and see. We had to mention Weber State because they're right there laying in the weeds, like you said, top 10 team in the nation. So anyways, anything other than that, Fritz, you want to throw out there? Always good talking some Big Sky. A lot of action to build on as we get ready for conference play. I feel like this week's kind of, you have a couple blowouts on the horizon, maybe signing some FBS versus SCS matchups, and then next week it all really begins.
Right, and yeah, I think it's a great game for the Griz to take on as they head into conference play. Mm-hmm. It should be a good test. It's a night game. I don't really like those. Mm-hmm. It's a blackout game. I think everybody's wearing black. Griz will have black unis.
Oh, I saw those online, yep.
I think a certain legendary quarterback might be raising a 37 flag since the St. Peters are off this week.
Oh, there we go.
But, yeah, I'm just looking forward to it. Making the trip down I-93 and watching a little football Saturday night.
There you go. That's what it's all about, Fritz. Well, thank you as always for your time, Fritz. I'm looking forward to it as well. Not every day you get to see a team on, 29-game winning streak on the road. So regardless if they're a D2 school, they're doing something right. They're a power in their own right, so they're going to be well coached. They're going to be in the right position, and they're not going to beat themselves most likely. So it's going to be a fun football game regardless. Looking forward to it. And another weekend of Big Sky football on the horizon. So thanks always, Fritz, and have a good one, and chat soon.
Thanks, Josh.
All right.